Roland had spent most of his life fixing broken machines, and the frontier outpost where he lived was full of them. Every morning he walked across the wide stretch of dry metal fields where old alien ships were scattered like giant bones. Some were rusted, some cracked open, and some still hummed with leftover energy that no one bothered to understand. But for Roland, this place was a kind of home. Machines didn't argue, they didn't complain, and they didn't judge. They simply waited to be repaired. On this particular day, the sky was pale and the wind was slow. Roland walked with a small bag of tools hanging from one shoulder, planning to search for spare wires and coils. The outpost was far from any major city, so he had learned to survive by collecting whatever useful pieces he could find and trading them later. As he made his way past a broken transport ship, he heard something strange. It wasn't the usual creak of metal or the hiss of leaking vents. It was softer, almost like a whimper. He stopped and listened more carefully. There it was again, faint, shaky, almost too quiet to notice. Roland frowned, wondering if it might be a broken coolant pipe. But coolant pipes didn't sound scared. They didn't tremble. This sound did. He followed the noise between two large engine blocks lying half buried in the dirt. The sound grew clearer the closer he got. A weak cry. A sound like someone calling for help, but without the strength to speak. Roland crouched down and shined his small flashlight under the collapsed hull. At first he didn't see anything except dust, shadows, and twisted metal. Then something moved, a small white shape pressed against the ground, shaking. His first thought was that it might be some kind of animal from the nearby hills. But as he leaned closer, his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a normal animal. Its fur was bright white, almost glowing under the flashlight, and its eyes were too large for its small body. The creature looked like a tiny wolf, but its ears were longer, and its tail had a thin silver streak running down the center. An albino alien wolf pup. Rare. Extremely rare. Most people in the outpost believed creatures like this were dangerous. Not because they attacked, but because they were linked with old alien legends. Some said they brought bad luck. Others said they carried strange diseases. Because of that, anyone who saw one stayed away from it. But Roland wasn't like most people. He didn't step back. He didn't run. He just stared at the trembling little creature that tried to make itself even smaller, almost as if it feared its own existence. "Hey there. It's okay," he whispered softly, even though he knew it couldn't understand his words. But sometimes tone mattered more than meaning. The pup tried to stand, but its legs shook too much. It collapsed again and let out another weak cry. Roland noticed how thin it was. Its ribs were visible, and its breathing was uneven. Something was very wrong. For a moment he simply watched it, unsure if he should interfere. The outpost rules were strict about interacting with alien wildlife, but leaving it there felt even more wrong. The creature was helpless. No mother, no pack, no sign of any adult nearby. Only metal scraps and dirt. He reached out slowly, making sure not to scare it. When the pup saw his hand, it let out a tiny hiss, bearing small, sharp teeth. But the threat was empty. It didn't have the energy to fight. "It's okay," he repeated gently. "I'm not here to hurt you." He kept his hand still, giving the pup time to understand that he wasn't dangerous. After a few moments, the creature's breathing slowed just enough to show it wasn't panicking anymore. Roland could now see small movements under the pup's fur, like tiny ripples. It wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. It made him frown with worry. But he didn't touch the creature yet. Instead, he carefully lifted the fallen piece of hull using a metal rod. With the space now clear, he slid both hands under the pup. It tensed at first, but when he lifted it gently, it didn't protest. It was too weak. The pup's body was strangely warm. much warmer than any earth animal. It pressed itself against his palm slightly, as if the warmth made it feel safer. Roland didn't know why, but a soft feeling spread through his chest. Maybe sympathy, maybe responsibility, maybe both. He wrapped the pup in his outer jacket to protect it from the cold wind. As he carried it back toward his workshop, he kept glancing down to make sure it was still breathing. Each time he did, the creature's chest rose and fell, slow but steady. When Roland entered the outpost, a few workers saw the bundle in his arms. One of them frowned and stepped back. "What are you carrying?" the worker asked. Roland hesitated. He knew what they would say if he told the truth. Still, he didn't like lying. "Just something I found," he replied. The worker leaned a bit to see better, and when he saw white fur, he took another step back. "Is that one of those alien pups?" he said quietly. "You should leave it outside. Those things bring trouble." Roland tightened his hold slightly. "It's not dangerous. It's just a baby." "That's even worse," the worker muttered. "Where there's a baby, there's a pack. And if the pack comes here, we're all done." Roland didn't answer. People always feared what they didn't understand. He knew the wolves were protective, but not mindless killers. And he also knew this pup wouldn't survive another hour out in the scrapyard. He walked past the worker without another word and entered his workshop. It was small but neat. Tools hung from the walls. Spare parts were organized in rows. And on one side stood a large workbench with adjustable lights. Roland cleared a space and carefully placed the pup on a soft cloth he used for delicate instruments. The creature shifted slightly, curling into a tiny ball. It let out a soft, tired sound, not a cry, just a small noise, as if relieved to be somewhere safe. He grabbed a scanner he normally used for reading energy levels in alien tech. It wasn't meant for animals, but he hoped it could at least show if something was inside the pup's body. When he hovered the device over the pup, the screen flickered with strange readings. A cluster of small moving shapes appeared. Too many. Far too many. Roland's eyebrows knit together in concern. He didn't want to imagine what the creatures inside the pup looked like. He didn't need to. He just knew the pup was suffering. He sat beside the workbench, thinking. He wasn't a doctor. He had no medical training. But he had fixed machines with worse problems. He had patched broken engines, rebuilt circuits eaten by insects, even restored old alien devices that most mechanics refused to touch. "Machines or not," he whispered, "everything deserves a chance to be repaired." The pup lifted its head at the sound of his voice. For a brief moment, their eyes met its pale, glowing eyes and his tired human ones. The pup didn't understand his words, but something in his tone made it relax just a little. Roland slowly extended a hand, letting the pup smell him. The creature sniffed weakly, then rested its head back down. That tiny moment of acceptance made him feel unexpectedly warm. He filled a small bowl with clean water and placed it near the pup's mouth. At first it ignored it, but after a while it leaned forward and took a slow sip. It was a good sign. A hopeful sign. Outside, the sky darkened as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The workshop lights glowed softly over the small creature resting on the cloth. Roland pulled up a chair and stayed nearby, watching over it. He didn't know exactly what he would do next. He didn't know how he would remove the things harming the pup. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to leave it alone. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Roland woke to the soft hum of his workshop lights. The pup was still curled up on the cloth, its white fur glowing faintly in the light. It stirred slightly when he moved, lifting its head and letting out a small, quiet sound. He had slept on a chair beside it, too worried to leave it alone. Even in sleep, he felt a strange bond forming. He knew the pup needed more than water and warmth. Its breathing was uneven, and he could see subtle movements under the fur that made him uneasy. He suspected parasites, though he had never seen anything like this before. Alien creatures could carry all kinds of strange organisms, and many were harmless. But this felt serious. He rubbed his face and looked at the little creature. "We'll figure this out," he whispered. "I promise." The pup tilted its head as if it understood. Its eyes followed him wherever he moved, and every small motion seemed deliberate. It was weak, but it had an intelligence in its gaze that caught Roland off guard. Most animals he had handled were instinct-driven, but this one seemed different. He grabbed his scanner from the night before and switched it on. The small device hummed softly as he carefully hovered it over the pup. Patterns appeared on the screen, tiny, fast-moving shapes that the machine identified as parasites. There were millions of them, and they were moving rapidly beneath the pup's skin. Roland felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had seen injured animals before, even alien wildlife, but never anything like this. He leaned closer, studying the pup's reaction. The creature's ears twitched, and its small body shivered. He could feel the tiny tremors beneath its skin. Each movement told him how much pain it was in, but also how desperately it wanted to survive. Roland knew he had to act carefully. One wrong move and he could harm it further. He had no veterinary tools, no medicines, and no one to call for advice. All he had were his hands, his mind, and a small pile of scraps from old machines. He decided to start slowly. First, he needed to calm the pup completely. Roland sat cross-legged on the floor, letting the creature crawl onto his lap. At first, it hesitated, eyes wide with fear. Its tail twitched nervously, but the warmth of his hands and the soft sound of his voice seemed to reassure it. It pressed itself gently against him and let out a small, exhausted sigh. Roland smiled faintly. "Good. That's good. Just breathe." He stroked its fur carefully, trying to keep it calm. It was delicate work. The pup's skin was thin and pale, almost translucent, and the slightest pressure could hurt. Yet, despite its fragility, there was a strength in its small body, a will to live that impressed him. He thought about what to do next. Normally, he would call a specialist or even send the pup to a safe facility. But the outpost was too far from anything like that. By the time help arrived, the pup might not survive. He had to find a solution himself. Roland dug through his workbench drawers, pulling out small heating coils, tubes, and old sterilizing equipment. He spent hours tinkering, trying to design something that could help without causing more harm. The pup remained on his lap for most of the morning, shifting only when necessary. Trusting him in ways he never expected. By midday, he had a rough plan. He would create a warm, contained area where the pup could be observed and gradually treated. Heat would slow down the parasite's movement, and gentle suction could remove some of them without hurting the pup. It was risky. Too risky. But he didn't see any other choice. He carefully placed the pup on a soft pad inside the small contraption he had built. The creature looked around, its ears flicking nervously at the strange sounds of the machine. Roland crouched beside it, holding its paw gently. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said softly. "Just stay calm. We'll do this together." The pup's eyes met his, and for a moment he could see fear and trust mixed together. It flinched slightly as the machine hummed to life, but Roland kept his hand on its paw, steadying it. Slowly, he adjusted the settings, careful not to shock it. The heat radiated gently, and the tiny suction tubes began their work. Minutes passed like hours. The pup trembled, but it did not fight. It seemed to sense that Roland was there, that he was protecting it. And in that trust, he found his own strength. He had faced dangerous machines, rogue robots, and alien wrecks before, but nothing had tested him like this small, fragile creature. Hours later, he stopped and checked the pup. It had grown quieter, more relaxed. Its breathing had steadied, and the movement beneath the skin was slower. The first stage had worked. Roland allowed himself a small sigh of relief, but he knew the battle wasn't over. There were still millions of tiny parasites that could harm it if left unchecked. Roland decided to stay with the pup for the night. He set up a small cot beside the workbench, keeping one hand near it at all times. He watched as it shifted, curling into a tiny ball, occasionally lifting its head to look at him. The bond between them was growing. He spoke softly, telling it stories about the machines he had repaired, the journeys he had taken, even the quiet nights spent under stars. It seemed to listen. At one point, the pup whimpered, a soft sound that made Roland's chest tighten. He leaned closer, stroking its fur. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it hurts. I'll make it stop. I promise." He spent the night thinking, planning the next steps. He would need to invent more tools, find ways to remove the remaining parasites safely, and most importantly, keep the pup calm. Any panic could worsen the infestation. And through it all, he realized something unexpected. He had begun to care for this small alien creature not just as a challenge, but as a friend. The morning sun crept through the small window of his workshop. The pup stirred again, more alert this time. It moved with slightly more strength and even nuzzled his hand, a tiny gesture of trust. Roland smiled. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And I'm not leaving you." He knew the journey ahead would be difficult. There would be mistakes, setbacks, and moments when he would question if he could save it. But for now, the pup was alive. It was trusting him. And that was enough to keep him going. As the day passed, Roland carefully observed the pup. He noticed small details, the twitch of an ear, the subtle shift in its breathing, the slight movements beneath the skin. Each detail mattered. He adjusted his tools, making tiny improvements, testing new methods that were gentler and more precise. Every step required patience. Every movement required focus. By evening, the pup had eaten a small portion of soft food Roland prepared. It wasn't much, but it was a sign of life, a sign that hope existed. Roland allowed himself a small smile. He had faced countless challenges repairing machines, but nothing compared to the weight of responsibility he felt for this fragile creature. And yet, as he watched it settle down for the night, he felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fixing machines. He was saving life. He was making a difference, not for profit or duty, but because it was the right thing to do. Roland leaned back in his chair, eyes on the small pup. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we'll keep going, together." The pup blinked slowly, almost as if it understood. And for the first time, Roland felt that maybe, just maybe, they could survive whatever came next. The morning air was crisp and quiet in the outpost, with a pale light spilling over the scattered hulls of old alien ships. Roland woke early, careful not to disturb the pup, who was already awake and stirring on the soft cloth he had prepared for it. The small creature lifted its head, its white fur almost glowing in the dim light, and looked at him with wide, cautious eyes. It was stronger than yesterday, but still weak, and Roland could see that the tiny parasites were still affecting its body. He stretched and rubbed his hands together. Today was the day he had decided to take more action. So far, he had calmed the pup, observed it, and carefully used his improvised scanner to monitor the parasites. But just observing wasn't enough. He needed to find a way to remove the remaining organisms without harming the fragile little creature. Roland gathered his makeshift tools, spread them neatly on the workbench, and began studying the pup. He noticed how it shifted its weight, how its ears flicked at every sound, and how its tail twitched nervously. The pup was intelligent, and it understood that he was planning something. even if it didn't know exactly what. "Easy," Roland whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you. Not even a little." The pup tilted its head, its glowing eyes tracking every movement of his hands. Its small body quivered slightly, but it stayed in place. Roland took a deep breath. He had designed a small device yesterday that could gently extract parasites using warmth and suction, but he had never tested it fully. He knew the risk: too much heat, too much pressure, and the pup could be injured. He started slowly, letting the device warm up while he held the pup carefully in his lap. He spoke softly, telling it stories about the machines he had repaired in the past, the strange trips he had taken across the outpost, and even small jokes to make the tense atmosphere lighter. The pup's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and for a moment it seemed to relax. Roland activated the device, its soft hum filling the workshop. He carefully positioned the tubes over the pup's body, making sure they wouldn't touch its skin directly. The first few seconds were critical. The pup's small muscles tensed, and it let out a low whine. Roland held its paw gently. "It's okay. Just breathe. We're okay." Slowly, the suction began to pull some of the parasites toward the tiny containment chamber he had made. Roland watched the scanner carefully, noting the changes in movement beneath the pup's skin. A few moments later, he saw the first sign of success. The parasites were being drawn out gently, and the pup remained stable. Hours passed like this. Roland had to take breaks, checking the pup's breathing, offering water, and sometimes letting it rest in his arms. Each time it looked at him with those pale, intelligent eyes, he felt a strange mix of responsibility and affection. He had never cared for a creature like this before. Machines didn't need comfort, didn't trust you, didn't depend on you. This pup did, and he felt a deep need to protect it, no matter the risk. The pup began to move more freely as the day went on. It lifted its head higher, sniffed the air around the workshop, and even nuzzled Roland's hand. Each small movement was a victory. Roland smiled faintly, exhausted but encouraged. "That's it," he said softly. "You're doing so well." Around midday, Roland noticed something unusual. The pup flinched slightly and hissed at the device. He paused immediately, concerned. Looking closer, he realized that a small group of parasites had hidden under a patch of skin that the device couldn't reach. They were clever, moving quickly to avoid the suction. Roland frowned. These organisms weren't just dangerous. They were smart. He took a step back and thought carefully. He had no medicines, no specialized tools, and no one to help. The solution had to come from his own mind. He remembered an old piece of alien tech he had salvaged, a small, portable heater with precise temperature control. It wasn't meant for living things, but if used carefully, it could help weaken the parasites, slowing their movement so he could remove them safely. Roland worked meticulously, adjusting the heat levels, testing on a small metal sample first, and then applying it gently around the pup. The pup shivered at first, but didn't struggle. Roland kept talking, soothing it, telling it how brave it was. The heat made the tiny parasites sluggish, and with careful hands, he used the suction device again. One by one, he removed the stubborn organisms. Hours passed. Sweat gathered on Roland's forehead. His arms ached from holding the pup so carefully, but he didn't stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the scanner showed a major reduction in the parasite population. The pup was breathing easier, its eyes brighter, and it even lifted its head to look at him, tail flicking with a hint of energy. Roland allowed himself a small sigh of relief. "You did it," he whispered. "You're going to be okay now." He set the pup gently on a soft pad, letting it stretch its legs for the first time. It moved cautiously, testing its strength, and then crawled back to him, nuzzling his hand. Roland felt a warmth in his chest he had never experienced before. This tiny, fragile creature had trusted him completely, and together they had overcome a danger that no one else in the outpost would have dared to face. But Roland knew the battle wasn't fully over. The pup was still weak, still vulnerable, and still needed constant care. He would have to watch it, feed it, protect it from infections, and continue monitoring for any signs of parasites returning. It was a long road, but for the first time, he felt like he had a purpose beyond machines. As the sun began to set, Roland prepared a small meal for the pup. He mashed soft food into a paste and placed it in a shallow bowl. At first, the pup hesitated, sniffing the food carefully. Then, slowly, it began to eat. Roland watched, heart swelling with relief. Each bite was a sign of life, a sign that his efforts were not in vain. After the meal, he settled down beside the pup, keeping it warm in his lap. The creature rested its head against his arm, eyes half closed, trusting him completely. Roland looked around his small workshop, at the scattered tools, the old machines, the strange alien artifacts, and realized that none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was this fragile life, this bond that had formed against all odds. Night fell, and the outpost grew silent. Roland stayed awake, watching over the pup, keeping it safe from the cold and the darkness outside. He spoke quietly, telling it stories, making jokes, and occasionally humming softly. The pup shifted closer, responding to the tone of his voice, and for a moment, everything felt calm, and he thought about the challenges ahead. The pup would need more care, and there would be days when it tested his patience, moments when it grew scared or restless. But he was ready. He had never felt this kind of responsibility before, and yet he felt capable. The pup had shown him that trust could be given even in the most difficult circumstances, and he would honor that trust. Roland leaned back in his chair, holding the pup gently. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we'll take another step. Together." The pup blinked slowly, almost as if it understood, and settled into a comfortable position. Roland's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, but he refused to leave. Not yet. Not until the creature was truly safe, not in the quiet of the workshop. Surrounded by tools and machines that had always been his companions, Roland realized something important. Life was fragile, yes, but it was also full of moments like this, moments of trust, moments of courage, moments of connection. And sometimes those moments came in the smallest, most unexpected forms. The albino pup had come to him helpless, trembling, and weak. But by the end of the day, it had survived a danger that would have killed most creatures. It had trusted a human it barely knew, and that trust had saved it. Roland allowed himself a small smile, tired but hopeful. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not give up on this small life. Not now, not ever. And as he sat there, holding the pup close, he felt a quiet determination settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers, whatever tests, they would face them together. The pup lifted its head slightly, and for a brief moment their eyes met. In that gaze, Roland felt a promise of survival, trust, and a bond that neither time nor fear could break. The next day, Roland woke to a faint vibration in the workshop. The pup, curled up on the cloth, lifted its head at the sound. Its ears twitched, and its pale eyes scanned the room carefully. Roland rubbed his face and glanced toward the door. The outpost was usually quiet, but today he could feel a tension in the air, a subtle warning that something unusual was coming. He stretched and took a deep breath. He had spent the last 2 days tending to the pup, carefully removing parasites and keeping it calm. The little creature was stronger now, breathing steadily, and even moving around the workshop with a little confidence. But it was still vulnerable, and Roland knew that the world outside could be dangerous. He approached the pup slowly, speaking in a soft, steady voice. "Don't worry. Nothing's going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." The pup tilted its head and blinked slowly, pressing gently against his hands. Its trust was growing, and Roland felt a mix of pride and responsibility. Suddenly, the workshop door creaked. The sound was faint, but enough to make both Roland and the pup tense. Roland held his breath and listened. Outside, he could hear low movements, almost like shadows shifting across the metal ground. His heart rate quickened. He had always been careful in the outpost, but nothing he had seen so far compared to this. He crouched beside the pup, keeping one hand on its back. "Stay calm," he whispered. The pup's body pressed closer to him, its tiny form trembling slightly, but it didn't try to run. It trusted him, and that trust gave him courage. Roland moved quietly toward the door and peeked outside. A group of scavengers from a nearby sector had come close to the workshop. They weren't hostile normally, but they were curious, and curiosity in the outpost could turn dangerous fast. He could see them examining the hulls, looking for useful parts, unaware of the tiny pup that had become the center of his world. He stepped back and thought quickly. The pup was weak and couldn't be exposed to strangers. He needed to protect it without drawing attention. He grabbed a large tarp and carefully draped it over the pup's resting place, creating a small shelter within the workshop. The creature pressed against the soft cloth beneath the tarp, ears flicking nervously at every sound. Roland held his breath as he watched the scavengers move closer. One of them paused near the workshop window, peering inside. He could see the faint glow of the pup's white fur under the tarp. For a moment, the scavenger's eyes widened. Then he shrugged and moved on. Roland exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. But he knew this was only temporary. The pup was still exposed in the long term, and anyone who discovered it could take it or harm it, either intentionally or by accident. He needed a better solution. He looked around the workshop. There were old crates, sheets of metal, and some discarded engine parts. Slowly, he began constructing a small enclosure that could protect the pup from outside threats. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep the creature safe and give him control over the environment. He measured carefully, cut metal sheets, and assembled the pieces with bolts and wires. All the while, he spoke softly to the pup, reassuring it with his voice. The pup watched him with interest, tilting its head as if trying to understand what he was doing. When he finished, he placed it gently inside the new enclosure. Its paws tested the edges, sniffing every corner, then it settled down with a small sigh. Roland smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. It was a small victory, but an important one. As he stepped back, he noticed movement outside again. This time it wasn't scavengers. It was a pack of wild alien creatures, drawn by the pup's presence. They weren't large, but there were several of them, and their glowing eyes reflected in the dim light of the workshop. Roland's chest tightened. The pup was small, fragile, and completely unprotected if they got in. He crouched beside the enclosure, placing his hands gently on the sides. "Stay calm. Don't move," he whispered. The pup pressed close, its body tense but still trusting him. Roland looked at the creatures outside. They weren't aggressive yet, but instinct told him they were curious and protective. If they realized the pup was here, they could attack anything in sight to get to it. Thinking quickly, he realized he had to act. He couldn't fight them outside. There were too many. He needed a distraction. He grabbed a handful of small metal scraps and tossed them to the far side of the outpost. The pieces clattered loudly, drawing the attention of the creatures. Their glowing eyes followed the sound, and they moved away from the workshop to investigate. Roland exhaled slowly, keeping his hands on the enclosure. The pup relaxed slightly, curling into a small ball inside. Its trust in him seemed even stronger now. He knew he had saved it again, but he also realized how vulnerable they both were. This was a dangerous world, and the pup's survival depended entirely on him. Hours passed. Roland stayed near the enclosure, keeping an eye on the pup and the surrounding area. He made small adjustments to the protective structure, reinforcing weak spots and making sure it was stable. The pup, now calmer, explored the space inside its temporary home, testing its strength and moving with cautious confidence. By late afternoon, the workshop was quiet again. Roland allowed himself a brief moment to relax. He watched the pup stretch its legs, yawn, and even nuzzle a small cloth toy he had made from scraps. It was a simple gesture, but it filled him with warmth. For all the danger outside, here inside the workshop, they had a small moment of peace. But Roland knew this calm would not last forever. The outpost was unpredictable, and threats could appear at any time. The pup was strong for now, but it still needed care, food, and protection. He couldn't let his guard down, not for a second. As night fell, the pale glow of the pup's fur created a soft light in the dim workshop. Roland stayed close, speaking softly and stroking its head gently. The creature closed its eyes, trusting him completely. Roland felt a strange sense of connection, as if they were bound together not just by circumstance, but by mutual reliance. He thought about the future. There would be challenges days when the pup was weak, when outsiders came too close, or when unexpected dangers appeared. But he was ready. He had faced challenges before, with machines and wrecks, but this was different. This was life, fragile and precious, and it depended on him. Roland leaned back in his chair, holding the pup gently in his lap. He whispered promises to it, telling it they would face whatever came next together. The creature pressed its head against him, eyes half closed, trusting him completely. For the first time, he realized that his life had changed. He was no longer just a mechanic in a remote outpost. He was a protector, a guardian, and a friend to a fragile life that had no one else. And in that quiet moment, with the pup safe and calm, Roland felt a determination stronger than anything he had ever known. No matter what challenges came, no matter what dangers appeared, he would not let the pup down. They had survived so much already, and together they could face anything. The pup stirred slightly, lifted its head, and looked at him with those glowing, intelligent eyes. In that gaze, Roland felt a quiet understanding. They had faced the first real challenge together and had come through it. And he knew, deep in his heart, that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Outside, the winds whispered through the metal wrecks. The shadows shifted across the ground, and the outpost remained quiet. But inside the workshop, there was life, trust, and determination. Roland held the pup close, feeling the weight of responsibility and the warmth of a bond that had been forged in moments of fear and care. He whispered softly again, "We'll be ready for whatever comes next, together." The pup closed its eyes, resting its head against him, and Roland stayed awake, watching, protecting, and preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. The morning air was still, with a pale light stretching over the metal fields of the outpost. Roland had spent the night beside the pup, keeping it warm and close. Its breathing was steady, and it seemed calmer than ever before. He felt a quiet relief, but instinct told him that the calm would not last. There was always something unexpected waiting in the frontier. Around midday, the ground vibrated faintly. At first, he thought it might be the wind or a distant vehicle, but then he noticed shapes moving in the distance. A pack of alien wolves, larger than the pup, appeared at the edge of the outpost. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were cautious but deliberate. They were not attacking, but they were watching. Roland's heart pounded. The pup had never seen its pack, and he knew instinct would guide them here. He also knew the wolves could be dangerous. They were territorial and protective. Yet something in their behavior suggested curiosity as well. They were drawn to the pup, following its scent and the faint sounds it had made in the workshop. He crouched beside the pup, whispering softly, "Stay calm. Don't move. Everything will be okay." The pup pressed close to him, trembling slightly, but it trusted him enough to stay. Roland scanned the area carefully, noticing that the wolves were approaching slowly, their steps measured. Careful not to provoke any sudden reaction, he thought quickly. There was no way to fight them, and there was no chance of escaping without exposing the pup. The wolves could sense fear, hesitation, or threat, and any wrong move could trigger aggression. Roland needed a plan. He remembered the small tarp and enclosure he had built. It might protect the pup temporarily. He gently lifted the creature and placed it inside, making sure it could see him, but was shielded from the wolves' direct attention. The pup's ears twitched, and it pressed against the cloth, its eyes wide but trusting him completely. Roland stepped back and raised his hand slowly, signaling calm. He spoke in a quiet voice, not to the wolves, but to himself, steadying his own nerves. "We can do this," he said softly. "Just stay calm. Everything will be fine." The wolves paused at the edge of the outpost. Their glowing eyes scanned the surroundings, observing Roland and the enclosure. One of the larger wolves stepped forward, ears tilted, sniffing the air. It was the leader. Its presence was commanding, and Roland could feel the intensity of its gaze. For a moment, he feared the worst. Then something unexpected happened. The leader sniffed the air around the enclosure, then looked directly at the pup. Its body relaxed slightly, and it lowered its head in a slow, deliberate gesture. The other wolves mirrored this, stepping back slightly and tilting their heads. Roland's eyes widened. This was not aggression. This was recognition. The pup stirred inside the enclosure, lifting its head and sniffing the air. The wolves' behavior seemed to reassure it. It pressed closer to the soft cloth, tail flicking slightly, and let out a small, tentative whine. Roland felt a strange warmth in his chest. The wolves weren't attacking. They were acknowledging the pup, recognizing it as part of their pack. Roland realized that the trust the pup had placed in him had extended to these wild creatures. Somehow, they understood that he was the one protecting it. They could have seen him as a threat, but instead, they accepted him, cautiously, as part of the pup's world. He stepped closer to the enclosure, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "It's okay," he whispered. "They won't hurt you." The pup looked up at him, then toward the wolves, and seemed to understand. Its ears twitched, but it remained calm. Roland felt a sense of pride and relief he hadn't experienced before. The leader of the pack stepped closer to the enclosure, sniffing gently around its edges. Its massive head moved slowly, and it made low, soft sounds almost like a rumble. The pup responded with a quiet whine, and Roland realized they were communicating, even across species. He marveled at the intelligence and sensitivity of these creatures. Hours passed with Roland observing quietly. The wolves didn't leave, but they didn't attack. They stayed at the edge of the outpost, watching, protecting, and acknowledging the pup's place. The pup gradually explored its enclosure, gaining confidence with each small movement. It sniffed the air, tested its legs, and even nudged Roland's hand gently. Roland spoke softly to the pup, praising its bravery and patience. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And they see it too. You're part of something bigger now." The pup blinked slowly, and for a moment it seemed to understand Dot as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the metal fields. Roland realized that the pack's presence was not a threat, but a protection. They were guardians, watching over the pup, and by extension, him. The realization was humbling. He had come into this world alone, fixing machines, surviving on his own. Now he had companions, not human, but life that understood connection, loyalty, and trust. The wolves began to settle at the edge of the outpost, lying down in the dust, their glowing eyes still watching. The leader glanced toward Roland one last time, then returned its attention to the pup. It was as if they had silently agreed. The human had proven himself worthy. Roland allowed himself a small sigh of relief, but he didn't relax completely. The frontier was unpredictable, and trust could be fragile. He needed to continue caring for the pup, protecting it, and learning from these creatures. But for now, there was a rare moment of peace. He stayed beside the enclosure as night fell, speaking softly to the pup, stroking its fur, and watching the wolves outside. The pup pressed against his hands, closing its eyes, trusting him completely. Roland realized how much they had both grown in these few days. He had learned patience, care, and understanding, and the pup had learned to trust a human despite fear and weakness. The night was quiet, except for the faint sounds of the pack outside. Roland thought about the journey ahead. There would be challenges, days of feeding, monitoring, protecting, but he felt ready. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and he had succeeded. Now he had allies in the wild, and a bond that could not easily be broken. He whispered softly, "We'll face everything together. You and me." The pup stirred, lifted its head, and nuzzled his hand. Its trust was absolute, and in that moment, Roland felt an overwhelming sense of connection. He was no longer alone, and neither was the pup. The wolves outside shifted slightly, and Roland noticed the leader's eyes reflecting the soft light of the workshop. There was respect there, a silent acknowledgement of his role as protector. He understood then that this bond, fragile as it seemed, was real and powerful. It was built on trust, courage, and care, and it could withstand the challenges ahead. Hours passed, and the outpost grew still. Roland stayed awake, keeping the pup close, speaking softly, and ensuring that it felt safe. The creature pressed against him, relaxed, and slowly drifted into a calm sleep. For the first time, Roland felt a deep sense of peace. He had not only protected life, but he had also earned its trust, and that trust extended to others in ways he could never have imagined. As he watched the pup sleep, he realized that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more dangers, and more lessons to learn. But for now, they had survived, and they had done it together. Roland leaned back, eyes on the small creature in his arms and the wolves outside, and felt a quiet determination. No matter what came next, they would face it side by side. The pup was safe, the pack was near, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a true sense of purpose and belonging. And in that quiet night, with the frontier stretching endlessly beyond the outpost, Roland knew one thing clearly. He would not let the pup down. Not now, not ever.